Welcome back, Blazor fans. It's time for another episode of Blazor State Has Changed. This is a show where I take the latest hot news for the week and give it a good talk about, and we'll do some live demos here on some Blazor projects and get hacking as well. So let's kick off with some news for the week. I've got some hot picks that I chose out of my Twitter feeds and Gitter and lots of other places where I keep up with community news. The first one that I've got is a project by a Twitter follower named Mr. Magoo, who created a Blazor Tetris clone. So this is called Blatris. I guess that's Blazor plus Tetris is Blatris. It's a pretty cool project, and I've seen two of these Tetris clones so far, and this is the second one that I've seen. But what's interesting about this one is it uses just a very little bit of JavaScript. So it's like one line of JavaScript, where the previous demo that I saw used a whole lot of JavaScript and very little Blazor. To defense of that first project that used a lot of JavaScript, this was done probably around Blazor 0.3.0, so there wasn't as much feature support for a lot of the stuff that's required to do this. But it's a cool project that I'll link on the show notes if you want to check it out. And I suggest you do. It's got some really cool ideas in there. So Blatris, yeah, that's a fun one. In the Gitter channel, there's Mr. Magoo just gave me an update. There is absolutely no JavaScript now on Blatris, so zero JavaScript. Maybe we'll pop open the GitHub and take a look at that in a minute. In the Gitter channel earlier yesterday, Daniel Roth was looking for feedback on Visual Studio Code users. So it looks like they're trying to increase support for Visual Studio Code for folks that would like to use that as their main development environment. So stop by the Gitter channel, let Daniel Roth know what your opinions are on using Visual Studio Code. Apparently there's some issues right now where it gives you some false errors with event bindings and whatnot, and they're looking at how they can handle that in the short term so they can get better support quickly and work on the tooling as time progresses. So make sure you give feedback to the team, because that stuff is getting worked into the product, and we've seen a lot of benefits from communicating with Daniel Roth and his team on what we'd like to see in Blazor. I wrote an article for blogs.telerik.com, and it's gotten some comments, but one of the comments in the article I thought was a really well thought out comment that I'm going to be replying to. So I put some thoughts together on how I'm going to reply to this question, because it was really well worded and very thoughtful. And the question is regarding Blazor project types. And the first question in this post was, how do you structure a project so you can move from full stack to client side later? Because in the article I talk about all the different project types, and we all, well, maybe not all of us know, but the latest news cycle has been that the official version of Blazor that will get in ASP.NET Core 3.0 will be called Razor Components and run server side. So what this gentleman is asking is, how do I structure my project so when the WebAssembly part of Blazor becomes official, how do I move my Razor Components projects over to a client-side project? And how do I structure those so it's not a pain? And I would say that the project types aren't necessarily best practices. They're more hello worlds to help you get started. But for the most part, these full stack applications, the full stack is more of an approach that's more flexible. So what I would suggest for this question is, if you're really serious about having something that you can move from server side to client side, is your basic multi-tier structured application. So you would have something where you would have a hybrid of both the full stack development project and the Razor components project type. And what I would do is start with the Razor components project type and make sure that I've got a clear layer of abstraction between my services. So in the example, they use the weather forecast service a lot. What I would do is take that weather forecast service and make an interface for it. So I could swap out with dependency injection different paths that I'd like that service to take. So for example, if I start with Razor components, I might have a weather service that talks directly through Entity Framework and interacts with the database that way and has the most efficiency. But if I want to move that application to Blazor later, which would be kind of the purple cube here, I could still call on an implementation of the weather service forecast that has a RESTful web API. And I can talk to the database through that. And then, eventually if you wanted to create a mobile companion app using Xamarin, you could reuse some of that same service architecture there. So I wouldn't use any of the prescribed 3 starting templates. I would make a version of my own that combined the best features out of the full stack and the Razor components projects. So it'd be kind of a custom thing, but you'd want to make sure that you have these different service layers in place. And Lohith has a comment as well, kind of agreeing with what I'm saying here, is to make sure that all things UI are in a client-side project or a separated project from the rest of the system. So it's kind of your basic interior architecture. It's just what I would suggest for that. The second question was, would I use a server-side approach? If I use a server-side approach for initial solution, this app is used by about 600 clients daily. Now, this 600 clients, I would have to ask, is this 600 clients a day total, or is this 600 multiple clients at the same time all day long? That wasn't clear in the question. I think that would make a huge difference. I would just, let's say, assume the worst, and it's 600 simultaneous clients hitting your app. Is this too much for the server-side approach, and would it handle that without a problem? Well, that would depend on your infrastructure that you have in place with your intranet at work. I'm sure you could build something that could scale out to that. But in the worst case scenario, what you would need to do is use the Azure SignalR as a service, and then you don't need to really worry about how many clients. You just have to worry about budgeting how much that's going to cost you as it scales up and down. So that's how I'd approach those 2 questions. But I thought they were really good questions, and it looks like the chat room kind of agrees here that for this many clients, we would probably be okay. But the nice thing about this is you can easily scale it up with Azure SignalR as a service. So great, well thought out question. And I'll be posting an answer to that in the article that you can find on blogs@telerik.com. And I'll link that in the show notes as well. So all the stuff that I just talked about, you can find at edcharbonneau.com. I'll push the show notes to my blog after the show today, probably about 30 minutes after we stop airing the live show. And I'm going to get back to some of the stuff that we went over real quick. Let's find Mr. Magoo's project on GitHub. We'll dig through some of the code right there on GitHub just to take a look and see what's inside. And then we can dig into last week's project and look at some of the things that went wrong and make some improvements there. And maybe we'll bite off some other ideas as well. So let's go ahead and close out our news segment here, open up some Visual Studio, and get started. Let me get some of these windows out of the way. And there's our Visual Studio. And let's get our browser up here too, because I want to go look at that solution, the Blazor Tetris thing that we were talking about. So trying to remember where I had a link stashed to this at. I'm just going to go to my Twitter real quick because I know I was tweeting about it just a few minutes ago. And we'll give Mr. Magoo a little shout out here. I've got his profile up on my Twitter feed, and there's the game here. So we'll jump into the GitHub page, and let's look at the live version of this real quick. So this is really cool. Mr. Magoo says, "This is an experiment. Please bear in mind, code may be ugly." That's what this show's all about, is just kind of hacking around and doing stuff live. And we don't expect everything to be the most refactored, prettiest version of everything. So wouldn't worry about it. We just want to see, what it does and check out how cool it is. So we've got pieces that drop down. We can move them around with the arrow keys, which is really slick. Oh, and it just got really fast. I'm not sure if I did that. Up and down up rotates and down drops. So we've got our basic Tetris game. This is really cool, and it's smooth feeling. When I tap on my arrow keys, I mean, it's instantaneous to what I had just clicked or tapped on the keyboard. So nice and performant there. And I like that we have a pause and resume too. I mean, that's a pretty cool feature to have, especially for a game. So let's jump back into GitHub. And it looks like we got multiple projects in here. We want to go into Blazor. And then we've got the game, the pieces. So the pieces are components. The point system and stuff are components. Looks like the piece. So this is a question I get a lot. And this will answer it for folks that haven't seen this before. But we've got a component here, and this is a CS.html file. And this is one of the Tetris pieces. It looks like we're using SVG. And we've got 2 states to it here, it looks like. But what's cool about the way this is structured is all of the markup is in the CS.html file. And if we go into this CS.html.cs file, this is where all of the code exists. So the nice thing about Blazor is the component model allows you to have these separated files where we can have the markup in a CS.html file and all the code for it in a CS file. And that's the way this has been abstracted here. So we have, we're inheriting from Blazor component, and that allows us to hook the HTML or the markup side of it to the code behind, for lack of a better term. I know code behind might bring back some terrifying memories from web forms days, but that's a accurate way, I guess, to say what type of file this is. It's the code that's behind the presentation. So we have got a lot going on here. I probably wouldn't be able to understand all this and reiterate it to you guys, but I just wanted to kind of take a look at the structure of the project and see how the components are laid out. This is a pretty cool project to kind of get an idea of how to do rich interactivity and see how scoring is done and things like that. So make sure you check this out. It's on Mr. Magoo's GitHub page, and I'll link that in the show notes so everybody can go in there and check that out and mess around with it. And it looks like there's some other examples in here too, which I've seen tweeted out. So I've seen Mr. Magoo tweet some of these things. Whoops, let me go back. I lost my page here. Under Blazor test, there's actually more than just the Tetris demo in here. We've got this really cool clock demo and some animation demos using some graphics and stuff. So there's some, what I'd say are abnormal things or out-of-the-box ideas. Usually we see things around forms and submitting data and doing CRUD operations. It's nice to see some things that are not the standard. So cool stuff. Make sure you check that out. So last week, we did a demo of CRUD operations And I had the bright idea of using in-memory database, which is mainly used for testing. And I like to use it for just pretty much any kind of demo project because I don't have to worry about SQL Server setup and all that stuff. I can just use this in-memory database, and the in-memory database is like a sandbox. So every time you load it load the application, the sandbox gets wiped and you get to start with a fresh database again. So it's super handy for that. The problem is seeding it is an issue. As we saw last week, it took kind of an hour to get it configured right. And it was really killing me because I've done it so many times, but I had all the code on another machine that I'm using for doing this stuff. So I wasn't able to just grab working code and paste it in and fix the problem right away. We did manage to work through it though. So in-memory database is really a cool feature. And you can actually set it up really easily within the startup CS file. So here, let me close all these out. We'll go back over things real quick and kind of review what we had done. The first thing we need is the dependency for, whoops, let's see, we need the server app. So if we look under dependencies, we needed to grab this Microsoft Entity Framework Core in-memory package, and that gives us the in-memory database. And then once we have that, we can spin up a DB context, and we have to create a special constructor for it that can accept options, so we can set up the options for the in-memory configuration. And the hang-up came when we wanted to seed the database. And it looks like there were two issues with that. One of those issues is you can do the seeding inside of on-model creating. And I think we had an issue with that because I wasn't calling the method, and I'll pull that method up here. Ensure created has to be called now, which this doesn't didn't have to be called in prior versions of in-memory DB that I'm aware of, and this is a new change. So I wasn't doing that. Another thing was I was trying to see the database external to the context, just because it's sometimes easier for me to set these things up outside of the context, and then when I don't need them anymore, I can just come into the startup CS and remove them. We ended up having to stick it in program CS and doing a getting the instance of the DB context from the service provider inside of program CS. I don't quite like that either. I'd rather put everything in startup because this is where most of our configuration and stuff already is anyway. And I looked back at my project and I figured it out right away what had happened. So when you get your default startup CS file, your configure method looks like this. I'm going to delete this line for a second. So you get iApplication Builder and iHosting environment in your configuration or configure method. What you have to do is actually just add iService Provider as well. Once you have iService Provider, then you can call get service and grab the database context from get service and then populate it here, and that will persist the changes and seed the database for you. We could move this out to another method and make this nice and tidy, so when we're ready to rip out the in-memory database, we can just come in here and change our configuration and pull out this database seed. But usually the stuff that I do this with ends up just being demoware anyway, so I just leave that stuff in. But it's still really an easy way to get started if you just know where to look. And like Lohith says, it's the little things. Yeah, the little things killed us last week and took about an hour of our time. And all we needed to do is set up this iService Provider interface and resolve that so we can get our customer context. And then I'm using a package that I talked about a few times on the show, so I won't go over it in detail here, called GenFoo. And this just lets us fill our database with placeholder data that's somewhat intelligent, and it's based on property names and things. So now we can run our database or run our application, and we'll be able to get a page that has a list of customers, and we can insert new customers into that database. So I'm going to spin this guy up so we can take a look. This is kind of where we left off last time. The only thing I changed is where the configuration took place. And now under, that's still the weather forecast data, we have a kind of a copy of that page that lists customers out. So we have this grid of customers, and then we can come in and I have a really ugly form that I can post data with, and I can put some names in here. Here, I'll just put my name. And then we can set a number of orders, and we could submit that data. We don't have anything to kind of give us a notification that it worked, other than going back and looking to see if that record's added, and it is. So we've got the full trip create and read operations working. What I want to do today is mess around with this just a little bit more. One thing I want to do is, this form is hideous, so I want to show kind of how it make that look nice very quickly using the tools that we already have in place, which is Bootstrap 4. So we can make this look a little bit nicer, and then we can finish off some of this CRUD operations, and we'll move on to something else. So if I wanted to make this look nicer, this form, let's go out to the Bootstrap website, and you can go to getbootstrap.com. I'm going to click on documentation, jump right into the docs. And then under components, you'll find forms. And this is where you'll find all the boilerplate code for simple forms with Bootstrap. This is where I'd get started. A lot of projects are really easily prototyped out using Bootstrap. So we can just come into Bootstrap and let's see, we can grab form groups, and we can do something like this. And we'll just grab this text out of here, this code. Come back to our component, which is under our solution client side. We've got create customer. This is where our code lives. And right now we've just got divs that are holding places for us. So we'll just do some good old-fashioned copy paste coding here. What we need is our form and our div. That's class is form group. So we can move our code into these. And we need to pay attention to this class, form control, because that's also going to make our inputs look nice. So we can actually just take our code and kind of move it up here, and then we'll grab our class for our form control, and we'll put that in our input tag. And we can remove this boilerplate stuff. We can put placeholders in as well. We probably don't need those for such a simple demo, but those are available if we need those. Now that we got something like this set up, we can kind of see how the Bootstrap classes flow for this. So for the most part, we need this form group, and we can close that off and kind of move up our code to here and just kind of update this. So we need to add the class for form control, and we'll just repeat this process until we get all of our inputs moved up into our form. So we kind of just started ugly and advanced it and iterate on it. This is how I do most of my dev work, is I start with a prototype and I just kind of iterate on the look and feel of it and make it look nicer as I go along. And then when I'm finally done with all the Bootstrap stuff, Bootstrap's actually pretty easy to modify and add themes to. And if I'm doing stuff with, usually this is going to be an ASP.NET Core. So I haven't really done any mainstream projects with Blazor yet, and that's for a couple reasons. Blazor is not ready for prime time yet, so everything I've done is demo work. But so speaking from past experience on MVC projects, I'll work with something like this, and then I'll add stuff like the Telerik UI components, then customize the entire application completely by overriding the Bootstrap themes and other themes that I've added, which is generally turns out to be a pretty nice looking app. And I've got some demos on docs.telerik.com, especially under the MVC site that you can follow to see how some of those projects are built. So while I was talking there, we've updated these to use the form group class, and I've added the form control to all the inputs. And then we can actually say, we should be able to do a button class here and make this look nicer as well. They still use, let's see, I don't think I've used a lot of Bootstrap 4 yet. And Visual Studio's giving me some issues. The button class, is it still BTN primary? I think that's about right. So we can refresh this and see how this looks. So we should be able to get rid of all this ugliness here. And it's rebuilding behind the scenes. It may get hung. There is still an issue. Oh, there, that looks somewhat better. The form is a little bit larger than I expected, but it looks a lot better than what we had. There's still an issue with builds hanging in Blazor, so we talked about this before as well. If you see your build hanging, you can come up and do build, and stop build will be in this list here. I've been pretty fortunate. It hasn't happened to me recently. I did a user group session last night, and I managed to get through the whole thing without it locking up. I'm not sure why that's working now, but if you do get stuck, build, stop build works, and then in the next version of Visual Studio, it'll be fixed. So now we got a better looking form. We could come in here and make it look just a little bit better even, so the form doesn't stretch all the way across the page like that. We could actually come in here. Let's see, do I have... yeah, I do. So I've got a tool installed. Let's go to tools. I'll show you where I've got this. Extensions and updates, so I don't leave anybody behind in what I'm doing. I have Web Essentials installed. Web Essentials is really a cool package for web developers. It's got a whole bunch of things in it. As you can see in this included extensions, there's a lot of things that help you with your development environment. And I'm using one of those things now. And if you saw, I typed in .row and just hit tab, and that kind of gave me a template for a div with a class of row. And you can do this with other stuff too. You could say pound ID, and it'll give you an ID, and so on. So these are pretty helpful for giving you a shortcut at typing. And that's coming from the Web Essentials package for Visual Studio. Lohith says, never do a build, usually do Control F5 and open the browser and navigate. Yeah, and refresh will cause a build. So if you're doing the client-side project, and client-side project only, so look at my solution. If I'm in my client project and I make a change to something on a Razor file or any of the code in here, I can come back to my web page and hit refresh, and this will automatically kick off a build. There was also a tool I showed a couple weeks back called Bionic Monitor that does this in reverse, and every time you save, it refreshes, it builds and refreshes your application from the command line. So there's two ways to do this, like a push versus a pull. This is more of a pull, where I come in and I hit reload and it kicks off a build. The only drawback to this way is I found if you are in a solution that has changes that you make on the server. And then you may also have, for example, this one has a shared folder. If I do something, say I updated customer, you still have to do a build to ensure that your entire application gets updated. So if you were to just come in to here and hit refresh, the server or the shared projects do not get rebuilt. So it's just something to keep in mind. I understand Lohith was talking specifically about the client, but for new users, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew if you're editing client, you can just use refresh in the browser. For any of the other projects in your solution, you have to rebuild. So some handy tips there. You can also use Bionic Monitor and do a push as well. So we've got our form updated. I was going to make this look a little bit better. We're going to take this row. We'll just wrap it around this form. And we'll just set this to... let's open up a div. I can't remember these off the top of my head. It is class equals column. For some reason, I'm not getting IntelliSense for Bootstrap today. And I don't know what I've done. I know these exist. So let's just go back. Again, I haven't used Bootstrap 4 very much. I've used Bootstrap 3 a ton and Foundation a ton. Let's go into layout, containers, grid. Okay, it's call small through medium. So we'd say call dash, and then we can specify a size. Let's just do 6 here, see how that looks. So we can divide our form up here into about half the page that should take up. Let's go back, refresh. And I'm really a stickler for things looking nice. So I do kind of get there. That looks a little better. It's taking up half. I'd probably even say tweak this a little bit. And we could also do XS here too, extra small. Start at the smallest size available. Let's do 4. And this should actually tighten it up even a little bit more. So our form doesn't stretch half the page, but a little bit less. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit too much, but good enough. We'll continue on. So Bootstrap's still a very handy thing. Seeing a lot of people migrating to just using Flexbox and CSS Grid. So I don't know how much longer we'll be using these Bootstrap column classes. I haven't quite done that transition myself. I haven't gotten into the whole Flexbox and all that yet. That's something I need to really look into this year, though, because it's getting to be quite the standard across browsers. So I'll be looking at that soon. Bionic is a great tool for this purpose. Lohith, are you talking specifically about scaffolding out like forms? I know or are you talking about the building thing that we were discussing earlier? So we have our basic form. Another thing we're working with here is I have these individual fields bound up here. I've got first name, last name, company name, total orders, and they're all bound to individual string and integer fields. All of those things eventually make up a customer, and I think I just did this for just getting started purposes and kind of firing off the hip. But we could actually new up a customer in here instead of doing individual fields. And I haven't actually tried this, but I believe this should work. And we could, instead of saying all of this, we can do a customer. We may need to initialize this customer as well. So we'll see how that handles in a second. We should be able to do this, though, and get rid of those fields and say customer dot first name instead. So we can use a little strongly typed model instead of individual fields. So we can approve that as well. And why does customer not contain a company name? Oops. I don't know what I just hit there. I was trying to get IntelliSense up. Company name. Oh, I've got a typo. The class actually is compay name. And somehow we didn't catch that. So let's go back into customer. Let's fix that. Instead of compay name, company name. And this is one of those cases where I need to rebuild everything, and I'll probably get some errors along the way that I need to go back and fix because I just changed that, and I didn't use my refactoring tools. And I've got a build hanging too. This is that build hang I was talking about. So let's go back in here and do cancel build. Let that fix itself. And again, this is getting fixed, so it's no use in doing an issue or anything. There's already an issue out on the GitHub repo for Blazor, and it's been marked as fixed in 15.9 of Visual Studio. And I expected that to fail because I have some uses of that type throughout the project. Company name, we'll fix that one. And then I also have it on, we're going to actually get rid of this. So we don't need it there. So we're going to refactor that out anyway. We'll come back, a couple more places where compay name was used and disappeared. Not sure where it's finding that one. I don't have it in my controller. I think I might have it on my view, my fetch customers view. Yep, there's one right there. I don't know why this is not getting picked up by the compiler, but there we go. Company name gets kicked out of there. And see if we can rebuild now. Yeah, that looks like it did it. So Lohith, you gotta go, man. It's all right. I know it's later in the day where you live, but thanks for joining us for a little bit. And remember, you can always catch the show on replay if you want to see what we covered. Eventually, we'll get these up on YouTube. They are getting saved right now, but they're not getting published yet. So there will be some replays available pretty soon on a YouTube channel that I'm getting set up. So technically, I'm on vacation. Right, I took time off. This is my side project right now, is to get this show up and running. So this is kind of something I'm doing, even though, excuse me, even though I'm on vacation. So I am slacking a little bit in getting those YouTube things set up. Move to YouTube, live YouTube, because you can rewind on live YouTube. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to be looking into multicasts when we start getting some more followers. The show's just started out. This is our 5th show. So the more people we get, the more features I'll add, and that'll definitely be one of them. I know C# Fritz, or Jeff Fritz, has multicast going on his channel, which has been pretty successful for him. And he's doing Mixer and I think YouTube Live and Twitch all at the same time. So that's something I'll be looking into. Yeah, you get a notification there too. You get notifications on Twitch if you're following the person on Twitch. I'm not sure where it's at in the UI. It's been a while since I've kind of looked at that part of it, but there should be a follow button or subscribe button, and it will send you notifications based on how you have your Twitch account set up. So you'll either get an email or a prompt on the mobile app and so on. It was nice meeting you at the meetup last night. Yeah. So my comment at the meetup last night. So I'm on vacation, and our meetup group here in Louisville, our speaker had a late meeting, so he asked if I could jump in and do a session, and of course I chose to do Blazor. So I said I either really love this group or I really love Blazor, or some combination of both. Because I'm doing it when I should be at home relaxing. But it's true. I love doing this stuff, and yeah, or both. I put that out there for folks to kind of get their own idea of what I love to do. But really, the meetup group, we were talking about it last night. 10 years of .NET meetup group. So 10 years is coming up for our meetup group, which is amazing. I need to find out a way to really celebrate that 10 years. We need to find some really amazing guests to bring in, and see if we can get some cool sponsors or something. So if you're from Louisville, that's something that we're considering planning. So back to this form. What I just did is I had first name, last name, company name, all separate fields. I can just create a new customer and use a strongly typed model that way. And then we're already passing a whole customer off there. So Bruno Santos says he'll be doing a presentation at the Hampton Roads .NET Dev Meetup this November. Yeah, November. Gosh, how many times I'm going to stumble on that. Awesome, Bruno. If you don't mind, you can throw a link in the chat for folks that might be in the area and want to sign up for that. Feel free to do that, promote that. Hyperhorse says, I've used Blazor for less than a week, and compared to any web framework, it's lightning fast to learn. Yeah, I agree. One of the things I really like about Blazor is it's very simple to understand. And I have an article, I mentioned it earlier, I think it's the same one. It's on blogs.telerik.com, and I'll put a link in the show notes to this one. I'll have to go out and find it again here. I talked about the comment that I received at the beginning of the show asking how to structure some applications. And our page is really slow for some reason. Hopefully it's not my internet dying again. So if you guys notice any breakup in the stream, I have Spectrum internet, which is terrible. So I blame any kind of outage on Spectrum. They're really bad about that, especially in my area. And I hate them for it. So there's that. Yeah, Blazor project types. I have in here this image. And I'm going to open this image in a new tab, and I'm going to zoom in on this, or it zoomed in for me. What I love about Blazor is how simple it is. And if I can explain pretty much the entire structure of how it works in one image, I think that's pretty amazing. So I've got this image of the counter component, and I just decorated it with some text. So you can see the top of the component is the routing, and this section is markup. This section is logic, and then we're binding data right here. So that's how simple Blazor is. I mean, how easy is that to explain to somebody? It's like you can look at the screenshot, understand what's going on, or you can do Angular and take 10 hours of courseware online and learn how that works. I know that's not an apples to apples comparison. There's a little bit more going on with the projects and dependency injection and routing and all that, but for all intents and purposes, that's about how simple Blazor is. So again, we built out this form. We made it look a little prettier. Let's make sure it still works. So I did some refactoring on it to get to go from individual fields to a strongly typed model. I think I might already have a record in there, so I'll put 2 on this one. And let's submit that. And oh, something changed. That form tag caused a postback. So when I added the Bootstrap classes and the form to this, that caused an actual postback to happen. It did actually work, but it caused my page to reload. Does anybody know? And I don't know this myself. I haven't really investigated this. In JavaScript, we have this the event, and we can kind of like cancel the postback on it. Is there something in Blazor to do that? I'm not intentionally. I don't really want to post this back, but I did throw it inside of a form tag. I don't know if there's a way to decorate that to make it not post back, but we really don't need that post back happening. I'm trying to remember if there was something by default we could just set in here. Don't remember. If anybody does remember, let me know in the chat. So when you click the button, we want to cancel the post back event. Is essentially what I wanted to do. Or we could just take the form tag out and make it less semantic. But I know there's got to be a way to do that. It's escaping me as to how it's done. I forgot. So we'll just for now take this form tag out because I know that's what's causing that post back to happen. And it does work. It does push my customer to my database. So we do have that set up. Another thing we could do, if we want to make this look a little nicer, we could give this a CSS class. Right now that display for our data doesn't look good, so we could come into fetch customers, and where we're building out this table, there's actually some table classes that we can use. If we go back to Bootstrap under components, we can find a bunch of those. Let's see. Where in here is it? Let's do grid. No, it's not grid. It's table. Tables. There we go. So under tables, we have different themes that we can apply to this. There's dark. This is the one I like. Table striped. So on our table body, we can just come in here and say table striped. And then when we go back to our app and do list customers, that's an old version, I think. It's why it's not working. Let's come back in here, Control F5 again. Just kick that application back off. And then we can come and list customers. That looks a little better. So if we're inside of a form, what we can do, Hyperhorse says just wrap the method in a, or the binding in a lambda expression, and that should do it. So, gosh, I'm almost certain there's another way to do this, but I've got an MVP meeting that I'm going to be missing for the show today. Thanks, calendar, for reminding me. So we could do this, and that would essentially cancel out that form posting. I swear there's another way to do it too, though. But we'll just remove the form tag for now and just get it out of our hair. So now we have some nice looking forms. Let's talk about something else for a few minutes. So we're coming up on close to an hour here, but I want to take a look at something else. I'm getting this question a lot, and I know there's a project out. I talked about it last week, but I haven't had any time to dive into it. So let's actually take a look at it now. I'm just going to go to my website because I can't remember where to look for it. And I know I talked about it last week. There is a project called Dual Mode for Blazor. Don't know if it's so much of a project as it is just a kind of a demo. And this was by a user that goes by Suchimon. That the person's name is Robin Sue. They're in the Gitter chat room quite a bit. So the idea about this is, and I got a lot of discussion on this last night at the meetup group when I did my presentation, and it kind of goes back to the original questions I had at the top of the show as well. What you can do with this Blazor Dual Mode idea is you can switch between Razor components and between Blazor client by just using a query string of mode equals server. I thought this was a really cool idea. I haven't looked into this to see how it works. Let's actually take a look at it. Let's clone this guy. I'm going to close out our project we're working on. We might pick some more of this up next week, but I just wanted to, for all intents and purposes, just show where in-memory DB failed for us last week and show kind of how to pick that up and make it work using this iService provider and kind of clean up the ugly forms that we had. I might experiment with that some more and bring up some more ideas for the show next week. But for now, let's close this out and play with something new. So let's go to Suchimon's Blazor Dual Mode. Hyperhorse said, I haven't tried EF in memory yet. What I'll do after the show is I'll go in and find that project, and I'll go ahead and push that up to GitHub so you could play with that, and other people that are on the show can go find it as well. And I'll put in my show notes where to grab that GitHub repo, so you can kind of hack at that. It does some simple CRUD with create and read operations. I need to work on some update and delete operations as well. But it was a good getting started project for last week, so I'll push it up to the web. So let's actually clone this. I don't do this often, but I'm going to try this in Visual Studio option here. Go ahead and open that. And this should clone the project for us, so we can check out how this was done. And it's put it on my other screen. We can drag this over. We'll go ahead and clone this. We'll go ahead and clone the repo, and we'll kind of give it a run and see how it works. So again, I'm cloning an item from last week's show notes. So if you want to look for it, it's in, if you go to edcharbonneau.com under the latest show notes post and click on Blazor Dual Mode, it'll take you right to it. But it's GitHub Suchimon Blazor Dual Mode. I'm cloning that into my Visual Studio right now. And let's see what's going on here. Okay, so we have Blazor Dual Mode. And let's go back to the GitHub repo and see how this works. So we should be able to dynamically switch from client to server by appending @mode equals server to the URL. This commit summarizes the necessary changes. I think this kind of walks us through how this was implemented if we wanted to hand code this out. So there's a change in the startup class, and the add Blazor server side service gets changed out to use Blazor server. And then with that, we can configure the client side. Let's see, there's a polyfill needed for HTTP client. So there's a couple of different things that have to happen to make this work. And it looks like Robin Sue's gone through and figured out what those things are. And then when we pass in that query string, our bootstrapper that is in index.html. And I'll talk about what the bootstrapper is for those who may not be aware of it. I talked about it in my session last night. If you're in the chat room and you saw me live last night, I talked about that bootstrapper there, but it's injecting the correct script at runtime to switch between the two. So that's actually really cool. Let's go into client, and I'll explain the bootstrapper. So in any of the Blazor application templates that you use, there's going to be a client client project. If you use the first option, it's 100% client. So if you don't see the word client, the entire project is the client. And if I go into client, there's a www root folder, and this is in all the client applications. There's an index HTML file, so just plain old HTML. It's not a Razor HTML file. So open this guy up, and inside of this HTML file, it's just basic HTML markup. And what you'll find is this script tag. And this one's different because this is the project that lets us toggle between Razor components and Blazor WebAssembly. So this one's a little bit different. But what you'll find in all of the client-side projects is a script tag, and there's a couple different scripts that run in here. There's one that is _framework Blazor server.js, and this is the bootstrapper for Blazor. That tells it it's running on the server side. This version kicks off a SignalR client. So blazor.server.js kicks off a SignalR client that opens a WebSocket and loads your application from the server. The other version is framework _framework blazor.webassembly.js, which this one instructs the browser to load mono.js and mono.wasm, and that kicks off a client application using WebAssembly. So what Robin Sue has done is check to see if you have a query string attached that is mode equals server. If it is, then it uses this JavaScript path that uses the SignalR client. Otherwise, it's going to use, by default, the WebAssembly client. So that's really cool and very simple on how that works. It looks like a lot of the actual work, though, is being done in the, let's see, it was in the docs here. There's some stuff that has to be done inside of the startup class as well. And we have to mess around with dependency injection to get the right HTTP client type. So that looks like the other moving piece. So let's look under startup. And that's where this is. So it says here, server-side Blazor doesn't register HTTP client by default. That's because it's already on the server and doesn't need to talk to the database through a service. It can talk to the database directly. So that would be why that doesn't exist there. So we need to make sure that service is available. So if we toggle, we can resolve it. Set up HTTP client for server side in a client side comfortable fashion. So if we're using it on the server side, we go ahead and add it this way. Create a scope for the URI that needs until the JS runtime is initialized. So this allows the dependency injection to happen whether we're toggling one or the other. So we've got that, and it looks like those are the only things that need to happen. That in this add server-side Blazor and configure services. So let's see, configure services. Oh, that would be on the server part of the application. So under server, under startup, we have add server-side Blazor. Add server-side Blazor services, and those registered by the project's startup doesn't hurt the client side. So it looks like if we're toggling between the two, if we're on the client, this it doesn't have any effect. If we toggle the server side, then this gives us the server side. So interesting. This will also serve as client-side app. So this registers SignalR. So we can register both, it looks like. And I would assume that the way this works is these are dependent on that JavaScript that I showed earlier. So it's able to pick up the necessary one that it needs, whether it's serving through SignalR or it's just serving a client-side application. So let's run this. And what's beneficial to doing this is not only seeing the flexibility of Blazor, but if we have the ability to toggle between the client-side SignalR version, or sorry, the server-side SignalR version and a client-side WebAssembly version, then we could create a debugging experience that does not exist right now. So currently you cannot really debug in Blazor that's running client-side. There's some stuff that I can show in a second that gives you the ability to set breakpoints, but you can't really do true debugging on the WebAssembly version of it yet. So, for example, if we want to come into the counter and break on this click event, let's try to see if this does anything. If we go into client pages, counter, and I wanted to break on this function. Right now, I'm not going to get a breakpoint. I can set one, but it's not going to break because, first of all, I'm running without debugging. So let's fix that. Just to prove a point, we'll run with debugging. If the stream gets slow or stuttery or something, it's because debugging can take up some extra resources that might interfere with the stream. Just let me know if the sound goes out or video gets choppy. But we won't be able to hit this breakpoint because the application's running in Chrome and we currently don't have a way to use the debugger with Chrome. So you can see I'm clicking and I'm not breaking on that piece of code. And what's strange is I'm not able to get Visual Studio to respond even. All right, so I can click that, nothing happens. I'm just trying to see if I can remember how to do debugging with Chrome. I think it's Shift-Alt-D possibly. Yeah, Shift-Alt-D will get you the debugger. And then you have to copy this. You have to copy this line here. It says, close all Chrome tabs, run the following. You make sure I get my quotes and everything. I'm going to copy this. Whoops. Copy this line. And then I need to close these out and hit Windows R and run Chrome in debug mode. This is an absolute pain. So we do that, and then we hit Shift-Alt-D again. See if this works. And this never works for me the first time. Let me try closing this guy out, not killing Chrome. Hit it again. There we go. So now we should be able to come in and set a breakpoint. Again, I don't know if this is going to work. I've done it in the past. It's not really helpful yet. Debugging when application has focus. Still not able to debug. Source. Let's go in here. It'd be under yeah, I'm not even seeing the files show up. Close browser. Yeah, I closed the browsers. It may be because I have a Twitch widget open, which may be stopping all the browser tabs from closing, and I don't want to lose that Twitch widget because that's my chat. So I might not be able to do this right here, right now. Yeah, it's not going to let me do it because I don't want to close out that widget that's open in another tab off screen. But essentially, you can set a breakpoint. Let's see if I can even, see if I can even find it in here. You would be able to navigate through, it's under framework or something in here, or you'll see your DLLs in here, and you'll be able to set a breakpoint that way. So to get back to my original thought, what this helps with is if we run this and we're able to toggle using just a query string, what we could possibly do is enable debugging in Visual Studio, which would be my preference. So we could say $mode equals server. So this should initialize server-side Blazor or Razor components. So let's see if this works. The load time has got me wondering if it actually did that or not. So I can see that the correct JavaScript has been initialized. We are in debug mode. I've got my breakpoint set. Let's see if this actually does what I assume it might do. Let's go to counter, and boom, there we go. Now we have debugging. So that is really cool. So let me sum it up again, because I got kind of in a long-winded explanation, and I don't know if that kind of clicked for everybody. So let me close this out. If I run this application as a WebAssembly Blazor application, I cannot debug. I can hit run with debugging enabled. You can come into Chrome, and when I click on the count, that breakpoint will not hit. So go to counter, click, the breakpoint does not hit. That's because debugging is not a thing in Blazor running on WebAssembly at this time. That's something that will come in the future, but currently that just doesn't work at all. There is another option to do debugging in the browser, which my preference would be in Visual Studio, but you can come into the browser, you can find your DLL file if you have it enabled. I can't enable it right now because of the streaming, but you would essentially find your DLL file and set a breakpoint in the browser. You can break. However, you can't see any of the values that you are currently inspecting. You can hover over them, you just don't see any value show up. So it's something that's a work in process. It's something that the Blazor team knows about, and they're working on, as far as I know, they're working on it. But it's not something that's easy to do, and they have to rely on the Mono team to work with them in fixing that issue. So to enable debugging, we can run Blazor server side, and debugging works fine because the context of the application is running on the server, and it's running as a standard .NET app. It's not using the Mono runtime for WebAssembly. It's just using the standard .NET runtime, which enables us to debug in Visual Studio without any issue. So what we can do is come in here and say mode equals server and switch over to Blazor running on the server. And once we do that, we can just debug like normal. So what's really awesome is if we need to troubleshoot something, we can set it up this way. You can see my breakpoint just hit. I come in and inspect my count. It's 0 still because it hasn't finished the increment. And then I can come in here, come up here, hit continue, and then my application continues to operate. This is immensely useful for troubleshooting. So say I'm hacking away at my application and I encounter some kind of error. Maybe my weather forecasts aren't showing up and it just continuously says loading or something like that, and I can't figure it out. Well, I can just come up into the address bar and say $mode equals server, and then set a breakpoint and then figure out why my data is not loading. So that is extremely helpful and really cool. And it didn't take a whole lot of work to enable that. I'm sure it took a ton of work to figure out how to enable that. But now that work has been done by Rob and Sue, and there's a demo that we can follow to enable that. It doesn't look like it's a whole lot to put that logic in your own project and make that happen. So I'm glad we had a chance to look at that today. That's definitely something that I'll be using in the future. It's, again, not having debugging is like missing a limb while you're trying to do this stuff. Hyper Horses, I'm saved. I knew you can rename some things, and but this saves a lot of time. Yeah, this is really cool. Saves a whole lot of time. Another thing that you could possibly do with this to take it maybe even one step further, until they resolve these debugging issues, you could actually come into your application, and I was in the wrong window, so I just killed my chat room history. But you could come into your application here and set up a button. Let's see if we can actually do that. It'd be better with a demo than trying to talk through it. So let's go to our index page. And we'll just do something silly and simple here. Let's do an anchor link, href equals, let's try this. Let's just say backslash mode equals server. We could put this in our main layout too, so it shows up maybe on the footer or whatever, but this is just an idea. And we can say enable server or something, or enable debugging. Use your own terminology, whatever you want to say. Then we could run this. So now we have a UI that we could just click on instead of going in the browser and typing each time. So just making it a little bit easier even to say, I have a problem, I need to debug, click a button, enable debugging. So let this guy reload. And then I should have a button on my index page. Now here's my enable server button. So let's test this out first. Let's go to counter, see if I still have a breakpoint set. Visual Studio, not liking this too much. Set my breakpoint. I may have to reload this app. For some reason, it's not letting me set a breakpoint. Let's stop this real quick. Visual Studio is having a rough time for some reason. I don't know what's causing it to hang so hard, but there we go. Couldn't see that breakpoint before. So I'll set that breakpoint, run it. Might take a second to spin it back up, but it's worth the wait because we're going to test this out, see how this works. That breakpoint should not hit. So the intention is that we're going to fail first. Okay, so the breakpoint doesn't hit. I can come back to my home page, click this button. You see my query string came up. It's not, it's using, so what's happened here is I was expecting it to reload the application and it did not. So what's happening is Blazor runs as a SPA application or a single page application. So it's actually trying to hit a route instead of refreshing the entire page. We would have to do something else here. We would have to say, I'd hate to put in the whole path. Trying to think how we could get around this. We might be able to do a target equals, oops. Target equals, might be able to do it this way. We could do blank, self, or parent. Let's try self, see if this kind of overrides that behavior. Darn it, I don't want to refresh. I want to come that way. We'll see if I can get this to work, but my hopes aren't real high right this second. Nope, I can see it. It didn't reload the whole app, and I don't think it's by hitting that route we're going to get. No, we're still in WebAssembly. So let's see. How else could we try to do this? It's a little hacky. We could open a new... Is it the slash? I don't think it's the slash. I think it's routing that's causing the issue. It's really hanging hard too. There we go. So no, I don't think it's a slash. It's the fact that it's a SPA application, and routing is, it's trying to, instead of load another URL, it's just saying navigate the app to this route. So let's try without the slash, but I don't think it's going to help. I don't know how to do it outside of routing. So much for taking a simple idea and making it work. It's going to be one of these things that causes more trouble than it's worth. Yeah, I didn't use it there, but I think that's not the issue. So it automatically put one in there. It's one of those things that would work either way. So you can see that the page doesn't refresh, and that's because it's doing a... it's just sending us to another route. It's the same as if I said counter in here. Oops. But when I put it in the address bar, it does a full load. But if I click on a link... So once this counter loads, I'll show what I meant by this. So if I type it up here, I get a full page navigation. But if I click in here, notice the app just changes through routing instead. So it's a single page application routing. It's not so much that it's the base, I don't think either. I don't think it's because it's in index HTML. It's because of the routing engine taking over the URL reroute or URL routing. So we could probably do target equals blank. This might actually do it because it's going to open up a new instance instead. Let's go ahead and stop this guy. It will open up a brand new window, but I don't know. We'll have to see how smooth that transition is. Might be something to play with outside the show and see how it works. Again, I'm just saving myself from having to type. I'm being really lazy. This is more through curiosity. I was seeing if I could just click here. So that kind of worked. It opened it in a new tab, which would cause, let's see, I don't need to break to see if it worked. I can just come in here. We can see it's running on server. So I actually have both versions of it running now. So now on this one, I can come in and click and I get a breakpoint. That's actually not too bad. And on this one, I'm already paused in Visual Studio, but now I don't get a breakpoint. Pretty cool. Yeah, you could do that as well. That's actually a great point. So window.location Zurias says use Windows dot location instead of href. So you could come in here possibly and say actually it wouldn't be an href at this point either. It'd be on click equals. If we don't use an @ sign, it's going to be JavaScript, I believe. So we could say window dot location equals let's just try \mode equals server and see if that does the trick. I probably need to reload this whole thing. Let's kill the browser completely. Thanks for that suggestion. I think this might actually do the trick. Good old JavaScript. Never fails. We try to not use it, and we end up using it anyway. At least it's not much of it. Give this another run. So we'll click counter, click back home, just to, I still need to give it some kind of href, I guess. Otherwise, it's coming up disabled. We could do something like that. Unless something in here I didn't type out right. Try refreshing this. Async coder, I'm late. You just came to the party, huh? We covered a lot of stuff already. You have probably watched some of it on the replay, but right now I'm failing really hard at trying to make something very simple work. So that didn't work either. Doing something wrong here on my href, I'm sure. Or let's inspect this and see what's going on. It may be something just really simple. Window on click. Mode equals server. That's not. Oh, I've got JavaScript errors like crazy. So that might give us a little insight. Window.location is not a function of HTML anchor element on click. So why is that? I know this is something basic that's just failing me. Why am I not able to do that? Good old Stack Overflow, let's see. Oh, we need, let's see, return. That's a person that's trying to do a function. So possibly it has to be a function. I think I'm getting down a rabbit hole with this one. Location is a property, not a method. Oh, okay. I gotcha. Window.location equals. So it's a property, not a method. So we'd set it this way. Gotcha. I was thinking it was a method. Maybe I'm thinking of something old school .NET, like which one was it? URL.navigate or something like that. It's like really basic stuff that you just don't use very often. So let's try to reload this one more time. There we go. That worked. And chat room saves the day again. So thank you for the suggestions, everybody. There's a bunch of you that kind of made that happen. So this will let us toggle between Razor Pages and Blazor WebAssembly at the click of a button. So if I inspect this, yep, I'm running Blazor server. So it's kind of ironic we got saved by a snippet of JavaScript here. But we're, if we put in a standard href, we would get SPA routing. What we want to do is actually navigate to another URL and append this query string. Yeah, Hyperhorse says I'm going to replace that on the about page for sure. So the idea here was if you just showed up to the show, I think Async Coder just showed up. What we were doing is we were playing with a project idea that I grabbed from my show notes last week. So if you go to edcharbonneau.com and look at my show notes from last week, this will actually be the second post probably by the time you guys are able to go there, unless you're going right now. So I'll post show notes from today. So if you look at the October 12th show notes and go to Dual Mode, this is a demo that was created by Robin Su or Suchimon on GitHub on how to toggle between server-side or Razor components and client-side WebAssembly Blazor by appending a query string of $mode equals server. So what this lets us do is you can't debug or set a breakpoint and debug with WebAssembly. But if you're running on the server with Razor components, you can. So instead of going up in the address bar, I'm just taking this demo one step further and saying, what if I had a button I could click on my UI that lets me enable debugging by running things server-side? So I'm going to go into my, let's see, where is this? My shared main layout page. And I could put this anywhere. Let's see, top row, Blazor about. There should be, I guess it's, well, I wanted my outermost thing. So main, I could put it at the bottom of main, or I could create a footer even. There's no footer on this app, because I haven't looked at it in that much detail. Yeah, there's no footer. I put it up here in about, which is about in the nav. No, about's up here. So yeah, I could put it up here. So I could put another tag up here. We don't even need about. Let's take about out of there. And I'm just going to call it debugging now. That's really what I want to do. Debug mode. How about that? Let's try that out. So let's rerun. Hyperhorse is getting in the mood. Like, that's the spirit. Let's do this. So now we can run our app. This should be part of the default project now. Like, I swear, until they get debugging working. Like, hey, Daniel Roth, if you're watching, like, let us do this. There was a CSS class, I guess, that made it show up on the other side, but who cares at this point? I can come in here and I'm not hitting a breakpoint because I'm on WebAssembly. I can click debug mode, and now I'm a superhero, and I can come in here and debug. So this is fun. This is awesome. I love it. Boom, and I'll hit a breakpoint right there. That is awesome. I love this. This has been a lot of fun. So now that's in my main layout. I'm going to Control Z through this for a second. So yeah, this was the class that pushed it to, or either that or it's a CSS class. Well, no, it'd be that guy there. We'll move that here. See if that pushes it back over to the right-hand side. That should do the trick. Just have to reload this whole thing. Didn't work. So I don't know why my class isn't working. I just wanted to throw it on the other side of the UI where it came from. Now I'm nitpicking really hard. See if this full reload works. Boy, that's a slow reload. It's probably because I'm running the streaming utilities and stuff on here. Normally, it runs a little bit faster. And there's some CSS that I need to work with, but we can push it back off to the original side that it was on. But for all intents and purposes, it works. Like I can click debug and I can enable debugging. That is awesome. That's very useful. So if we learned anything today, it's to check that out. I'm going to wrap up the show with that. I think that's a good stopping point, and we'll figure out some more cool stuff to talk about next week. I don't know what that is. I pulled this stuff kind of out of thin air, and again, I'm going to put on my website, edcharbonneau.com, within the next half hour. I will post the show notes for the show, which included the things I talked about today. I need to go in and create a GitHub repo for the projects that I worked on today. Share those out so we can find them. My network is taking a dive, looks like. Hopefully the stream's still going good. But if you go to my website, there'll be a listing of, there they are, show notes for the past few weeks. This is about all I've been blogging about lately, at least on my own site. And you'll find a recording of the show. If you came in late and you want to catch the beginning, you can replay it there right on Twitch. And then I'll list out all of the things that we talked about and useful links for the show. We'll talk about some new stuff next week. Like I said, I kind of put these together purposely at the last moment to try not to plan so much that it comes off like a conference session or something like that. So we'll keep it kind of freestyle, and we'll come up with things as they the community posts new ideas and fun projects to tinker with, and we'll build on some projects that we've already started and hack at things and just have some fun every week. So thanks again for joining me. I will be back next Friday. I will still be on vacation, but I'll be doing yet another show Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Bruno's mentioning that Bionic now works on Windows. If you haven't checked out Bruno Santos's project, he's got a really cool command line tool called Bionic. Bruno, feel free to throw a link in the chat for people that are on right now. If you guys have anything to share with each other, go ahead, put a URL in the chat room. I don't mind. You can find some of this stuff in previous show notes as well. So I probably won't post it again because it's already in the October 6th show notes. We've got lots of links in there. Bionic's in there, Bionic monitor and things like that. Bruno does a great job of making videos that go along with those tools that he's releasing. There's lots of cool links in the Blazor.net community section. I'll post all my stuff up here very shortly. And then next Friday I'm on. I don't have any travel scheduled until mid-November, and I will either miss a show in mid-November or it will be live from Sofia, Bulgaria. So I don't know if I'll be able to muster enough bandwidth to do a live show, but we'll try to do one if time permits. And I don't know what time of day it would be for everybody there, but we'll see what I can make happen. So I've got a couple months or a couple weeks to plan that out and see what I can come up with. If all else fails, I'll do a show when I come back from that trip. So thanks again, everybody, for joining me and hacking away at stuff. And we'll do this again soon. Until then, take care.